The auction bell rang once, and every noble in Ravenswood Court looked at the scar before they looked at the girl. Grace Holloway stood on the raised platform beneath black candles and silver chandeliers, her wrists marked with a small silver lot tag, her plain white auction dress buttoned too tightly at the throat, her pale warm ivory skin almost colorless beneath the court lights. She kept her chin lifted because it was the only thing they had not priced yet. Around her, the hall whispered as if shame were entertainment. Damaged Omega. Debt-born. Unclaimable. Cursed. The words moved through the crowd in silk voices and jeweled laughter, but Grace did not lower her gray-blue eyes. She had learned long ago that people became crueler when they knew you were listening. Lord Victor Harlan stood beside the auction dais with a polished black cane and a smile made for contracts. Lot 27, he announced, Grace Holloway, age 23, Omega classification confirmed, debt transfer legally entered, no active claim, no family protection, visible scar irregularity disclosed. The hall murmured at the last phrase. Visible scar irregularity. As if the silver line that curved from her left collarbone toward her throat were a flaw in fabric, not the last thing her mother had left her. Grace's fingers tightened, but she did not touch the scar. She could still hear her mother's voice from the night everything burned. Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready. Grace had never known what truth her mother meant. She only knew the scar made people step back, whisper prayers, and decide she was worth less before she spoke. Lady Celeste Marlowe sat near the Luna platform in pale blue silk, fair-skinned and golden-haired, perfect enough to look bored by another woman's humiliation. Her gaze moved over Grace with delicate disgust. Even pity has standards, she murmured, and the noble women around her smiled. Victor lifted the silver hammer. Opening bid, 5,000 crown dollars. Silence. Grace felt it strike harder than laughter. Not one hand lifted. Not one alpha leaned forward. The entire court agreed, without speaking, that she was not worth saving. Victor waited the proper number of seconds, then sighed with theatrical regret. Shall we lower to 3,000? Still nothing. The border lord in the front row smiled slowly, heavy rings flashing on his fingers. Grace's stomach turned cold. Everyone knew what happened to Omegas sold far from crown protection. The law would call it transfer. The world would call it fate. Victor's hammer rose again. Final private bid accepted from Lord Bramwell of the northern border. Grace forced herself not to step back. She would not give them the pleasure of watching her fear move her feet. Then the great doors opened. Cold air swept through the auction hall, carrying the scent of rain, cedar, and something older than law. Every candle flame bent toward the entrance. Alpha King Elias Ravenswood walked in wearing black and silver, tall enough that the hall seemed to shrink around him, broad-shouldered, light olive skin shadowed by the crown above his dark hair, golden wolf eyes fixed on the platform. The court stood so quickly chairs scraped across marble. Victor went pale for half a second before bowing. Your Majesty, we were not told you would attend the dead auction. Elias did not look at him. He looked at Grace's scar. The silver line beneath her collar began to glow. A sound passed through the court, soft and frightened. Grace froze. Elias stopped at the foot of the platform, his dangerous, beautiful face unreadable, but his eyes had changed from gold to molten light. Remove her tag, he said. Victor's smile returned, thinner now. By auction law, she could not leave the platform unless bought or claimed. Grace looked at the king, waiting for possession to replace pity. Instead, Elias reached up, removed the crown from his head, and placed it on the marble floor. Then he pulled the royal signet ring from his hand and set it beside the crown. Then I pay, he said, voice low enough to silence every breath in the hall, with my crown and my name. Grace's scar blazed silver under the chandeliers, and for the first time, the court did not look at her like damaged property. They looked at her like a secret powerful enough to ruin a king. 3 weeks before the crown touched the marble floor, Grace Holloway woke in the Holloway debt house to the sound of someone counting coins outside her door. The sound was soft, almost polite, but Grace had learned that debt never needed to shout. It lived in ledgers, locks, lowered voices, and the way people looked at her wrists before they looked at her face, as if searching for the tag that would eventually prove she belonged to someone else. Her room was barely wide enough for a narrow bed, a cracked wash basin, and a wooden chair with one uneven leg. Frost silvered the inside of the small window, and the morning light made her pale, warm ivory skin look even more fragile than she felt. Grace sat up carefully, because the old scar along the left side of her neck always tightened after sleep. It curved from her collarbone toward her throat in a faint silver line, too smooth to look like ordinary damage and too strange to let anyone forget it was there. She covered it before she stood, wrapping a high gray scarf around her neck with practiced fingers. In the small mirror above the basin, her gray-blue eyes stared back at her, tired but clear, surrounded by the soft shadows of another short night. Her long, soft brown hair fell loose down her back, and for one foolish second she looked almost like the daughter of the Holloway estate again, the girl who used to run through apple orchards in a blue Sunday dress, while her mother laughed from the porch. Then someone knocked once and opened the door without waiting. "Laundry hall," Mrs. Pike said, holding a ledger against her chest. The Marlowe gowns arrived after midnight, and the lace must be cleaned before noon. Grace tied her hair low and reached for her worn brown dress. "Good morning to you too." Mrs. Pike's mouth tightened. "Debt girls do not earn mornings. They earn hours." That was the rule of Holloway Debt House. Hours belonged to creditors before they belonged to breath. Grace worked first in the washroom, where steam filled the air and soap stung the cracks in her fingers. She scrubbed linen sheets for noble families who would never know her name, boiled lace collars in copper tubs, and rinsed silk stockings so delicate they cost more than a month of her meals. The other Omega women worked beside her in silence, some older, some younger, all wearing scarves, cuffs, or tags that marked one kind of debt or another. Grace noticed when a girl named Anna began swaying over a bucket, her face pale with hunger. Without stopping her own work, Grace slid half of her breakfast bread beneath a folded towel and pushed it toward her. Anna whispered, "You need that." Grace wrung water from a sleeve. "I also need you conscious before Mrs. Pike notices." Kindness was dangerous in a place where everything could be charged against you, but Grace had never learned how to watch someone suffer and call it wisdom. By mid-morning, she was sent to the sewing hall, where sunlight fell in pale strips across long tables stacked with gowns for the upcoming Ravenswood Luna season. Noble girls had ordered silver hems, pearl sleeves, and velvet cloaks for court appearances, while the women who stitched them wore patched dresses and counted needle pricks like weather. Grace sat near the end of the table, shoulders slightly hunched to keep her scarf high, guiding a line of thread through blue silk. A young seamstress across from her glanced at the scarf and quickly looked away. Grace knew that look. Curiosity mixed with fear. People wanted to see the scar until they saw it. Then they wanted permission to dislike what it made them feel. At noon, Lady Celeste Marlowe entered the sewing hall with 2 attendants and the smooth confidence of someone who believed the world had been arranged for her comfort. She was fair-skinned and golden-haired, dressed in cream wool trimmed with pale fur, her beauty sharp in a room of tired women. Mrs. Pike nearly bowed herself in half. "Lady Marlowe, your gown is nearly ready." Celeste's gaze passed over the silk, the tables, the bent heads, and stopped on Grace. "That one is a Holloway, is she not?" Grace kept her needle steady. "Grace Holloway, my lady." "I remember the name." Celeste stepped closer. "Your family had land once." "Yes. How sad to see what remains." The room went still. Grace tied off the thread, placed the needle down, and finally looked up. "Land can be taken. Manors are usually surrendered." A seamstress choked softly on a breath. Mrs. Pike went pale. Celeste smiled as if Grace had amused her. "Careful. Pride is expensive for a woman with debt." Her attendant lifted a pale blue gown from its wrapping and held it up. Celeste tilted her head. "The neckline needs lowering." Mrs. Pike nodded quickly. "Of course." Celeste's eyes returned to Grace's scarf. "Some of us have nothing to hide." Grace felt the old scar tighten beneath the cloth, a cold pull of memory and warning. She could still hear whispers from years of market days and debt reviews. "Cursed skin. Ruined Omega. No alpha would risk that mark. Claims sour around scars like that. She kept her voice even. Then you must sleep very peacefully. Celeste's smile thinned, and Grace knew she had made an enemy long before she understood how dangerous that enemy could be. The afternoon brought kitchen duty. Grace peeled potatoes, carried flour sacks, and helped stir a stew that smelled better than anything the Det women would be served. Lord Victor Harlan arrived near dusk with the house creditor, both men dressed in dark court coats that made the kitchen servants straighten in fear. Victor was handsome in the polished way of knives kept behind glass, with silver at his temples and a corded visor's calm smile. He did not belong in kitchens, which meant he wanted someone inside one. His gaze found Grace at once. Miss Holloway. The sound of her family name in his mouth made the room colder. Grace wiped her hands on a towel. Lord Harlan. He opened a folder. Your family debt has matured. Grace had expected the words for months and still felt them land like ice. I made the winter payments. Partial payments. The roof tax doubled. Crown maintenance fees changed. After the estate was seized, Victor's smile remained. The order of events does not alter the balance. He pulled a paper free and placed it on the table beside the flower. Under Omega debt transfer, an unclaimed Omega debtor may be reassigned to court auction if repayment fails. The kitchen vanished around her. Grace heard Anna inhale. Mrs. Pike looked down at the floor, relief and guilt mixing on her face because as long as Grace was chosen, someone else might not be. Grace forced her hands to stay open. I am not livestock. Victor's eyebrows lifted. No one used that word. You wrote around it. For the first time, his smile dimmed. You have your mother's tongue. The scar beneath Grace's scarf warmed so suddenly she almost touched it. Did you know my mother? Victor looked at the knot of fabric at her throat. Everyone knew enough of Margaret Holloway to regret it. Then his court smile returned. You will be transported to Ravenswood Court in 3 days. You will be inspected, classified, and entered properly. If you are fortunate, a quiet household will purchase your debt. Grace stared at the transfer paper. Her name sat in black ink beside a number. Lot pending. Price to be assessed. The world had finally done what it had always threatened to do. It had turned her into an amount. That night, Grace returned to her narrow room with flour still on her sleeve and Celeste's unfinished blue gown folded over one arm. She sat on the edge of the bed and untied her scarf. In the mirror, the silver scar caught the candlelight. It did not look ugly to her. It looked lonely. It looked like a language no one had taught her to read. She remembered her mother's hand pressing over it the night the Holloway estate fell, remembered smoke beyond the nursery windows, remembered a voice shaking with love and fear. Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready. Grace had spent 10 years obeying that warning without knowing whether it protected her or cursed her. Now she was being sent to the royal court itself, into the hands of men who measured Omega lives by debt and law. She should have cried. Instead, she took the last piece of charcoal from the cold fireplace and wrote a small note on the underside of the windowsill where no creditor would bother to look. I was here before they priced me. Then she wrapped the scarf around her neck again, straightened her spine, and lay down fully dressed, because in 3 days the auction would ring for her, and Grace Holloway intended to arrive with the one thing no law had managed to sell, her name. Grace kept the transfer paper folded beneath her pillow until the candle burned low, not because hiding it changed anything, but because looking at her name beside a number made the walls of the room seem smaller. 3 days. That was all the law had given her between being a person who owed money and a body entered for auction. The Holloway debt house slept around her with the uneven quiet of women too tired to dream safely. Somewhere below, Mrs. Pike locked the kitchen stores. Somewhere above, a creditor's clerk turned ledger pages by lamplight, adding interest to lives he would never have to carry. Grace lay fully dressed on her narrow bed, gray scarf wrapped high around her throat, and pressed 2 fingers against the silver scar beneath the cloth. It felt cool now, almost innocent, but she knew better than to trust quiet things. Quiet had surrounded the Holloway estate before it fell. She had been 13 that night, old enough to remember and young enough that memory still arrived in broken pieces. Rain had tapped the nursery windows. Her mother had come in without a candle, moving quickly, her dark hair unpinned, her pale face marked by fear she tried to hide. "Grace," she whispered, "get dressed." There had been lights beyond the orchard, too many for servants, too steady for neighbors. Crown riders, her father had said earlier that week, though he had tried to sound amused. A misunderstanding, he told them. An old title dispute. A court advisor making noise because Holloway land sat too close to the Ravenswood border roads. But Grace had seen the way her mother stopped singing when letters arrived sealed in black wax. That night, the house smelled of smoke before Grace saw any flame. Not wild smoke, not chaos, but the sharp scent of torches carried by men who believed paperwork made cruelty civilized. Her mother wrapped a cloak around Grace and led her through the back stairs toward the old chapel corridor. "Listen to me carefully," she said. "Whatever happens, you must not let them examine your blood." Grace's heart pounded. Who? Men who call greed protection. At the chapel door, Margaret Holloway knelt before her daughter and pulled the collar of Grace's nightdress aside. Grace had not had the scar then. Only a faint birthmark near her left collarbone, pale as moo milk, shaped like a small curve of light beneath the skin. Her mother touched it with shaking fingers. "This mark is older than our debt, older than their laws, older than the crown they hide behind." "Is it bad?" Grace asked. Margaret's eyes filled, but her voice stayed firm. "No. That is why they will want to own it." A shout echoed down the corridor. Grace flinched, but her mother cupped her face. "I am going to seal it." "Will it hurt?" "Less than being found." Grace remembered the old chapel window, the silver rain running down colored glass, her mother's palm warm over her collarbone, and words spoken in a language Grace had never heard but somehow understood as love shaped into command. Light had bloomed beneath her skin. Not fire. Not pain exactly. A bright pressure, like the moon pressing a promise into bone. When it ended, the birthmark was gone, replaced by the silver scar that curved from collarbone toward throat. Her mother tore a strip from her own sleeve and wrapped it around Grace's neck. "Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready." "What truth?" Grace whispered. The chapel doors opened before Margaret could answer. Men in crown colors stood beyond them, wet from rain, faces hidden by hoods. Behind them, Lord Victor Harlan held a black folder against his chest, younger then, but already wearing that careful smile. "Lady Holloway," he said, "the court requires your cooperation." Grace remembered her mother standing in front of her. She remembered being pushed through the vestry door by a servant who cried without making sound. She remembered crawling under the chapel foundation and pressing both hands over her mouth while voices moved above her. No clash of swords, no screams she could describe, only orders, boots, the crackle of torches, and the terrible neatness of people taking a family apart according to law. By dawn, her father was gone into custody, her mother was missing, the estate was sealed, and Grace was told Holloway Holdings had been seized for crown debt and suspected disloyalty. No trial reached her. No explanation stayed consistent. Some said her parents had betrayed the crown. Some said they had hidden assets. Some said Margaret Holloway had practiced forbidden vow magic. All Grace knew was that every version ended with her alone, wearing a scarf over a mark adults feared too much to name. The scar became her first lesson in how quickly pity turns into suspicion. At market, mothers pulled their sons away from her. At service inspections, appraisers lowered her value before she spoke. Once, when she was 16, an alpha visitor at the debt house saw the scar after her scarf slipped in the laundry yard. He had been interested in purchasing her service contract that morning. By afternoon, he told Mrs. Pike he did not buy cursed things. Grace had gone back inside, tied the scarf tighter, and learned that disgust could feel almost gentle compared with fear. Fear made people creative. They invented reasons the scar was proof of rejection, bad blood, broken fertility, ruined instincts, dangerous magic, or divine punishment. No one invented the possibility that it was protection. That possibility belonged to her mother, and even Grace had been afraid to believe it. The worst fear was not that the scar made her worthless. The world had tried hard enough to teach her that she could live under the lie without accepting it. The worst fear was that her mother had sealed something inside her that would harm anyone who came close. Grace had grown up measuring every kindness against that warning. When Anna leaned on her shoulder after fainting, Grace angled her scarf away. When a kind stable boy once asked whether he could court her on Sundays, Grace pretended not to hear. When other Omega women whispered about finding a decent household, a safe claim, a future with children and warm bread and a front door that opened from the inside, Grace smiled for them and kept her own hopes folded smaller than paper. What if the scar was a curse waiting for touch? What if royal blood would wake it because royal blood had made it necessary? What if anyone who tried to claim her inherited the disaster that swallowed Holloway estate? The next morning after Lord Victor's transfer. Notice, Grace was sent to the inventory room beneath the dead house, where women chosen for auction were measured, classified, and entered into court records. Mrs. Pike wrote down Grace's height, age, rank, work history, and visible marks. When she reached the scar, her pen paused. Remove the scarf. Grace did not move. It is already disclosed. Court inspection requires confirmation. Grace untied the knot with fingers that remembered her mother's hands. The room changed when the scar showed. It always did. Mrs. Pike looked away first. The creditor's clerk leaned closer with unpleasant interest. Silver tissue, he said. Unusual. Skin, Grace replied. Mine. He smiled as if she had made a joke. Potential buyers dislike surprises. Then I hope they are disappointed. Mrs. Pike's mouth tightened, but something like regret passed through her eyes. Grace, do not provoke them at court. Would silence make them kind? It may make them bored. Grace wrapped the scarf back around her neck. I have never mistaken boredom for mercy. The clerk stamped her form with red wax. Lot pending became Lot 27. The number followed her for the rest of the day. It appeared on a tag tied to her service trunk. It appeared on the transport list. It appeared on a folded white auction dress laid across her bed by sunset. Grace touched the dress once, then pulled her hand away. White was supposed to mean purity in court language. In auction law, it meant visibility. It meant every flaw could be inspected from a distance. That night, Grace found Anna waiting outside her room with a small bundle. It is not much, Anna whispered. Inside was a pair of gloves, carefully mended. Grace's throat tightened. You need these. You gave me bread. Bread is different. Not when you are hungry. Grace held the gloves to her chest and for one dangerous moment nearly cried. Instead, she hugged Anna carefully, keeping the scar turned away. Do not let them enter your name, she whispered. Hide your debt papers if you have to. Anna pulled back, frightened. Can they be hidden? Everything important has been hidden from me for 10 years. Someone must be good at it. After Anna left, Grace stood before the mirror and lowered the scarf again. The silver scar caught the candlelight, thin and bright against her pale, warm ivory skin. She looked at it the way one might look at a locked letter from the dead. What truth were you waiting for? She whispered. No answer came. Only the memory of her mother's warning, and beneath it, something Grace had never allowed herself to feel clearly. Not shame, not fear, but anger. Clean, quiet anger. The kind that did not need to shout because it had survived long enough to become a spine. At dawn, when the carriage came to take her to Ravenswood Court, Grace put on the white dress, the gray scarf, and Anna's gloves. She left the room without looking back, but at the door she paused and touched the hidden note beneath the windowsill. I was here before they priced me. Then she followed the guards into the cold morning, carrying her fear, her scar, and the last unfinished command her mother had given her into the world of the Alpha King. The carriage that came for Grace Holloway had no family crest on its doors, only a brass plate stamped with the Ravenswood auction seal, and a small number written beneath it in black, 27. Grace stared at the number before she stepped inside, and for one sharp moment the whole world narrowed to that piece of metal. Not her name. Not her mother's daughter. Not the last heir of a house whose orchards had once stretched for miles along the western road. 27. The law had simplified her into something easy to transport. She wore the plain white auction dress Mrs. Pike had left on her bed, long-sleeved but thin, made to look modest while revealing every line the court wanted to judge. Around her neck, she tied the gray scarf twice, high enough to hide the silver scar that curved from her left collarbone toward her throat. Anna's mended gloves covered her hands. They were too large at the fingers, but Grace kept them on because they were the only kindness traveling with her. Mrs. Pike stood by the debt house door with the transfer ledger tucked beneath one arm, refusing to look emotional. "Keep your answers short at court," she said. "Long answers sound like defiance." Grace looked at the building that had taken 10 years of work and still called her unpaid. Maybe defiance is only truth with better posture. Mrs. Pike's mouth trembled as if she wanted to say something human, but Lord Victor Harlan arrived before she could. He stepped from the shadow of the carriage in a dark coat trimmed with gray fur, his silver-templed hair perfect despite the cold wind, his expression calm enough to make panic look impolite. "Miss Holloway," he said, "we are on a schedule." Grace climbed into the carriage without taking his offered hand. "Of course. Auctions must not be kept waiting by the merchandise." Victor's smile thinned. "You would find the day easier if you stopped mistaking procedure for cruelty. And you would find yourself kinder if you stopped mistaking cruelty for procedure." He looked at her then, truly looked, and for the first time Grace saw irritation disturb his polished face. It was a small victory. She took it with her as the carriage rolled away from the Holloway debt house and toward Ravenswood Court. The road was long and cold, cutting through bare fields, pine forests, and old crown villages where people stopped to watch the sealed auction carriage pass. Grace sat straight-backed on the narrow bench while Victor reviewed papers across from her, turning pages with gloved fingers. He did not speak for the first hour. That was fine. Silence gave Grace room to count the things no one had taken yet. Her memory. Her anger. The exact sound of her mother saying the word truth. The note beneath the windowsill. The fact that she knew she was not a number, even if the court needed one to sell her. By late afternoon, Ravenswood Palace appeared beyond a ridge of black trees, vast and severe, its towers built from dark stone veined with silver, its high windows catching the winter sun like watchful eyes. Grace had heard stories of the palace all her life: the Alpha King's court, the Luna platform, the Crown Auction Hall, the rooms where noble families decided the futures of people who would never be invited to sit. She had imagined it as distant and cold. She had not imagined how beautiful it would be. That felt unfair. Cruel things should not be allowed to shine. The carriage entered through the service gate, not the royal arch, and stopped behind a long stone wing where other Omega debt transfers waited under guard. Some were dressed in white like Grace. Some wore pale gray. Some cried openly. Some stared at nothing. A young Omega with dark curls clutched a wooden charm against her chest, whispering a prayer under her breath. Grace wanted to go to her, but a clerk seized Grace's elbow before she could move. "Lot 27 to inspection." Grace pulled her arm free. "I can walk." The clerk blinked, startled by the idea that walking required permission. Victor's voice came from behind her. "Let her." That was not mercy. It was strategy. He wanted her calm, presentable, and proud enough for the court to enjoy breaking. Grace followed the clerk through a corridor lined with mirrors. She hated the mirrors immediately. They turned the transferred Omegas into a procession of white dresses, lowered eyes, and hidden terror. At the end of the corridor, the inspection chamber waited beneath a chandelier of black crystal. 3 women sat behind a table with ledgers. A royal appraiser stood near a screen. Silver lot tags lay in neat rows on velvet trays. The room smelled of ink, lavender water, and fear covered with perfume. "Name?" one clerk asked. "Grace Holloway." "Rank?" "Omega." "Family protection?" Grace kept her eyes on the woman's pen. "None recognized." "Visible irregularities?" Victor stepped closer. "Declared scar, left collar and throat. Silver tissue. No active claim." The appraiser looked up. "Scarf off." Grace did not move. The room cooled around her. The clerk repeated, "Scarf off, lot 27." Grace looked at Victor. You already disclosed it. Disclosure is not inspection. Inspection is not ownership. The appraiser sighed as if Grace had inconvenienced her rather than been brought into a room to be measured for sale. The court must see what it is pricing. Grace untied the scarf slowly. She would not claw at the knot like she was ashamed of her own skin. When the cloth fell away, the silver scar caught the chandelier light. It always changed a room. The appraiser's professional expression faltered. One clerk whispered something under her breath. Victor watched not the scar, but Grace's face, as if waiting for the humiliation to complete its work. She disappointed him by standing still. The appraiser placed a cold measuring chain near Grace's neck without touching the scar. Unusual texture. So I have been told. Does it cause fever? Bond disturbance? Failed claims. Grace lifted her gray-blue eyes. No one has ever asked the scar. They usually decide for it. The youngest clerk looked down to hide a reaction. Victor cleared his throat. Enter visible scar irregularity with buyer warning. Set base price low to avoid contest. Low? Grace asked. He turned to her. Damaged lots attract specialized bids. A lower opening price encourages resolution. Resolution, she repeated. That is a beautiful word for selling someone quickly. Before Victor could answer, the appraiser reached for a silver tag. Wrist. Grace extended her right wrist because refusing would only give them another line in the ledger. The tag was small, polished, and engraved with the number 27. When the appraiser clipped it around Grace's wrist, the silver scar at her throat warmed. Grace went still. It was not the tightening she felt after sleep. Not the cold warning that came when strangers stared too long. This was a pulse. Soft. Hidden. Alive. The black crystal chandelier above them flickered. The appraiser frowned. Did you see that? Victor's gaze snapped to the candles. Draft from the corridor. There was no draft. Grace felt the scar warm again, answering something beyond the chamber door. Footsteps sounded in the hall, measured and heavy enough to make every clerk sit straighter. A scent entered before the man did: cedar, rain, ironwood, and winter air. The royal appraiser dropped into a bow. Victor turned with visible surprise. Alpha King Elias Ravenswood passed the open chamber doorway with 2 guards behind him, dressed in a black and silver court coat, tall and broad-shouldered, light olive skin framed by the dark color, black hair brushed back beneath the shadow of a simple crown, golden wolf eyes forward. He should have continued walking. Kings did not stop for auction inspections. But the scar burned beneath Grace's skin, and Elias stopped as if an invisible hand had closed around his heart. Slowly, he turned his head. His gaze found Grace through the open door. Then it dropped to the scar. The room forgot how to breathe. Grace remembered her mother's warning so sharply she nearly stepped back. Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready. Elias did not enter. He did not touch her. He stood in the corridor with his golden eyes fixed on the silver line at her throat, and something in his expression changed from royal indifference to recognition, so deep it looked like fear. The candle flames in the inspection chamber bent toward him, then toward Grace, as if caught between 2 parts of an old vow. Victor moved first. Your Majesty, he said smoothly, stepping into the doorway to block the view. A routine debt transfer. Nothing requiring crown attention. Elias looked at him. Then why did the royal flame answer? Victor's smile did not break, but Grace saw the muscle move in his jaw. Old buildings have old drafts. Elias's eyes returned to Grace. What is her name? Victor answered before she could. Lot 27. The king's face hardened. I asked her name. Grace felt every person in the room look at her. Her voice came out quieter than she wanted, but clear. Grace Holloway. Elias repeated it once, not loudly, not tenderly, but as if the name had weight the ledger failed to record. Grace Holloway. The scar pulsed silver. This time, everyone saw it. The appraiser stepped back. One clerk gasped. Victor's hand tightened around his cane. Grace covered the scar instinctively with her palm, panic rising cold in her chest. The warning. The crown blood. The truth not ready. Elias saw the fear and did something no one in that room expected. He stepped back. Not forward. Back. Giving her space. She is not to enter the auction hall until I review her debt papers. Victor's voice sharpened beneath the courtesy. Your Majesty, under Omega debt transfer, once entered and tagged, she must proceed to public selection unless purchased, claimed, or legally removed by equal title compensation. Grace did not understand all the law, but she understood the satisfaction Victor tried to hide. The tag on her wrist had become a chain with courtroom language. Elias looked at the silver band, then at her hidden scar beneath her hand. His voice lowered. Then no one touches her before I know why the flame recognized her. The words should have comforted Grace. Instead, they frightened her almost as much as the auction. Royal attention was not safety. It was a brighter kind of danger. As guards escorted her from the inspection chamber to a waiting room with barred windows and velvet chairs, Grace kept her palm over the scar and her eyes on the floor. Behind her, she heard Celeste Marlowe's voice drift from the hallway, light and cold as falling snow. So that is the scarred thing from the debt house. Grace looked up. Celeste stood beside the Luna corridor in pale blue silk, golden hair perfect, fair face bright with disdain. Her eyes moved from the tag on Grace's wrist to the scarf clutched at her throat. Even pity has standards. Grace straightened. Then I hope yours improves before it embarrasses you. Celeste's smile vanished. For one breath, court and debt house, silk and servant cloth, crown and auction tag all seemed to balance on a single thread. Then Victor appeared behind Celeste, and the thread tightened into a noose. Prepare her for public selection, he told the guards. The law remains in force. Grace's scar glowed under her hand as the auction bell rang somewhere beyond the doors, deep and silver and final. The world of the Alpha King had opened around her, and every exit had a price. Grace was not taken directly to the auction hall after the bell. That was Lord Victor Harlan's first mistake. He thought delay would frighten her into obedience, but fear had lived beside Grace for so long that it no longer knew how to impress her. Instead, the guards led her through a side corridor into a smaller inspection chamber behind the royal hall, where black velvet curtains softened the walls and silver lamps burned with smokeless flame. A long table stood at the center, covered with ledgers, measuring chains, contract seals, and a shallow bowl of royal fire protected beneath glass. Grace recognized the bowl from old debt house stories. It was crown flame, used to verify claims, contracts, blood promises, and auction transfers. Omegas were not supposed to touch it. Debt girls were not even supposed to stand near it unless someone important was deciding their future. Grace stood 3 feet away from the table with the silver lot tag coiled around her wrist, her gray scarf retied so high it nearly brushed her jaw. The scar beneath it pulsed in slow hidden rhythm, as if it had heard the auction bell and was answering from under her skin. Lord Victor closed the door behind them. You have made an impression. Grace looked at the glass bowl. I was standing still. Some people are troublesome even in silence. He crossed to the table and opened her debt file with careful fingers. His Majesty's attention complicates matters. It would be wise for you to cooperate. Does cooperation mean letting you sell me faster? It means not mistaking royal curiosity for rescue. Grace looked at him then. You sound worried. Victor smiled. I sound experienced. Kings notice strange things. Then advisors repair the damage. Before Grace could answer, the inner door opened and the royal appraiser returned with 2 attendants, followed by Lady Celeste Marlowe. Celeste should not have been there. The inspection chamber was not a parlor, and Grace was not foolish enough to believe the Luna candidate had entered by accident. She wore pale blue silk that made her fair skin glow in the lamplight, her golden hair pinned with pearls, her face arranged into beautiful indifference. Lord Harlan, she said, the court is waiting. A brief verification, Victor replied. Celeste's gaze slid to Grace. For the scarred lot? Grace kept her voice calm. My name is Grace. For now. The room went very quiet. Victor did not correct her. That told Grace more than his ledgers did. Celeste stepped closer, studying the scarf. His Majesty asked your name in front of court staff. Do not confuse that with value. Grace thought of the way Elias Ravenswood had stepped back when he saw her fear, giving. Her space no one had offered all day. She pushed the thought away because hope was dangerous, especially when wearing a crown. I have never needed a king to give me value. Celeste smiled softly. No, you need one to keep you from being sold. The words struck because they were true enough to wound. Grace's fingers tightened against Anna's gloves. Victor lifted the silver lot ledger and turned it toward the appraiser. Under auction law, irregular marks must be tested before public bidding if Royal Flame responds. We will verify whether the scar carries curse residue, claim contamination, or unlawful vow magic. Grace's stomach chilled. No, Victor looked almost pleased. No, you are not testing my scar. The law allows inspection. The law has allowed many ugly things today. The appraiser cleared her throat, uncomfortable but obedient. Miss Holloway, if the scar is not verified, buyers may request invasive contract review after purchase. A preliminary test may protect you. Protect. Grace nearly laughed. Everyone who wanted access to her body had learned to place the word protect in front of the door. What does the test require? She asked. Victor gestured toward the table. Remove the scarf. Place your left hand near the crown flame. If the scar is harmless, the flame will remain gold. And if it changes? Celeste answered before Victor could. Then the court will know exactly what kind of damage thing it is bidding on. Grace met her eyes. You are afraid it will change. Celeste's smile froze. Victor's tone sharpened. Enough. Scarf off. Grace did not move. The scar warmed more deeply, spreading silver heat from collarbone to throat, not painful but alert. Her mother's warning sounded again, not distant now, but close enough to feel like breath against her ear. Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready. Royal blood had not touched it. Royal flame was not blood. But something about the bowl called to the scar with the same old language. Grace knew she should refuse. She also knew refusal would be written as guilt before the ink dried. She untied the scarf slowly and let it fall over her arm. The appraiser looked down. 1. Attendant whispered a prayer. The silver scar shone faintly against Grace's pale warm ivory skin, a curved line too elegant to be damage, too alive to be ordinary. The crown flame under glass flickered gold, then leaned toward her. Victor's face tightened. Celeste stepped back before remembering who she wanted to be. Hand, Victor said. Grace placed her left hand on the edge of the table, not touching the bowl, not touching the flame, only near enough for the test. The lot tag around her wrist chilled, then flashed silver. The crown flame went still. For one impossible heartbeat, every lamp in the chamber dimmed. Then the flame bowed. Not to Victor. Not to Celeste. To Grace. The gold fire lowered inside the glass bowl, as if greeting someone older than the crown itself. The scar at her throat blazed with clean silver light. Grace gasped and grabbed the table, not from pain, but from the shock of feeling something inside her answer. A vow. A door. A memory that was not fully hers. The appraiser stumbled backward. That is not curse residue. Victor shut the ledger hard. Stop the test. Celeste's voice sharpened. Cover it. But the silver light had already escaped the chamber. It slipped through the gap beneath the inner door and washed into the corridor like moonlight spilled from a secret room. Footsteps stopped outside. Guards murmured. Then everything went quiet. Grace knew before the door opened. The scar knew before she did. Alpha King Elias Ravenswood entered without ceremony, his black and silver coat dark against the silver glow, tall and broad-shouldered, crown still on his head, golden wolf eyes fixed on the bowed flame. The room seemed to shrink around his presence. Victor bowed too late. Your Majesty, this was a routine verification. Elias did not look at him. Routine flames do not kneel. Grace's breath caught. Kneel. That was what it looked like. The royal fire, protected behind glass, had lowered itself toward the scar everyone called a flaw. Elias stepped closer, then stopped when Grace's hand moved instinctively to cover her throat. His golden eyes lifted from the scar to her face. Did they force this? The question broke something small. Inside her. Not because it saved her. Because it asked whether force mattered. Grace swallowed. They called it inspection. Elias's jaw tightened. Celeste moved swiftly. Your Majesty, the mark may be manipulating royal flame. A dangerous omega can appear sacred if the court wants spectacle. Elias finally looked at her. The silence that followed made every attendant lower their eyes. The court does not want this spectacle, Lady Marlowe. That is why everyone in this room looks terrified. Celeste paled. Victor recovered faster. Even if the reaction is unusual, auction law remains clear. She is tagged, entered, and scheduled. Until legal removal, she proceeds to public selection. Elias turned toward the appraiser. What did the flame read? The woman trembled. I am not qualified to certify it. Then speak what you saw. The flame recognized vow resonance. Victor said sharply, unverified. The appraiser continued, her voice small but steady. Crown level vow resonance. Grace stared at the bowl. Crown level. The words should have meant nothing to her, but the scar pulsed like it understood. Elias's expression changed, not with greed, not with triumph, but with a depth of recognition that frightened her almost as much as the auction. A crownmate seal, he said quietly. Victor's eyes flashed. An old superstition. An old law, Elias corrected. Older than your auction statute. Celeste looked from the king to Grace, and hatred finally showed through the polish. She is a dead omega. Grace's head turned slowly. I heard you. Celeste's lips parted. Grace stepped away from the table, scarf still in her hand, scar uncovered for everyone to see. The silver light softened, but did not vanish. I heard every version today. Dead omega. Scarred lot. Damaged thing. Irregular mark. I am beginning to wonder why all your words get smaller every time the truth gets larger. The appraiser lowered her head. One attendant stared at Grace as if seeing her for the first time. Elias watched her with something fierce and quiet in his face, but he still did not touch her. Victor saw that too. His smile returned, thin as wire. Powerful words. Unfortunately, speeches do not. Void transfer law. If His Majesty believes the mark significant, he may file inquiry after the auction concludes. Elias's eyes narrowed. After she is sold. After legal process completes. No, that one word filled the chamber. Victor bowed his head slightly. Then claim her. Grace went cold. The scar flared, not in welcome this time, but warning. Elias looked at her immediately, and the speed of that concern made her chest hurt. Victor continued, voice smooth. If she is truly crown mate, claim removes her from auction. If not, the claim fails and the court knows the reaction was false. A simple solution. Celeste smiled again because this was the prettier cage. If Elias claimed Grace, the court would say he took her for the power in the scar. If Grace accepted, she would leave the auction as property with a softer name. If she refused, Victor would push her to the platform. Elias understood. His face hardened, but he said nothing for several breaths. Then he turned to Grace. I will not claim you to win an argument. Victor's smile faded. Grace stared at Elias. The royal fire glowed between them, reflected in his golden eyes. Then what happens to me? She asked. The question was quieter than she wanted, but she let it stand. Elias looked at the tag on her wrist. I find another way. Victor tapped the ledger. There is no other way under auction law. Elias turned to him. Then I will read every word of the law before the bell rings again. He looked at the guards. Move Miss Holloway to the royal guest wing. Victor's voice sharpened. She is an entered lot. She is under crown inquiry. That delays, but does not remove auction claim. Then delay it. The guards hesitated only once before obeying the king. Grace picked up her scarf but did not put it back on. She could feel Celeste staring at the scar, measuring it now not as shame, but as threat. As Grace passed Elias, the crown flame behind glass bent again, following her by an inch. Everyone saw. Everyone pretended not to understand. Elias walked beside her through the corridor, leaving careful space between them. You should cover the scar if you want privacy, he said. Grace looked ahead. I have had privacy. It did not protect me. His golden eyes flicked toward her, surprised and grimly admiring. No, it did not. Behind them, in the inspection chamber, Victor's voice dropped low enough that only Celeste heard. If the archivist confirms crown mate, she cannot be sold. Celeste's answer was colder than the silver light fading from the walls. Then make sure the truth reaches the auction after she does. The royal guest wing was more beautiful than any room Grace had ever cleaned, and that was why she trusted it even less. The guards led her through a corridor of dark polished wood, silver-framed mirrors, and windows tall enough to make the sky feel owned by the palace. Every door they passed had carved wolf crests and quiet servants standing ready to bow, as if comfort here was not a feeling but a command. Grace walked with her scarf still in her hand and the silver scar uncovered at her throat. She had meant what she said. Hiding had not protected her. Still, every glance that flickered toward the scar felt like a finger against a bruise. Alpha King Elias Ravenswood walked beside her with several feet of space between them, tall and silent in his black and silver coat, crown shadowing his dark hair, golden wolf eyes fixed forward. His presence made the hallway quieter. Servants stopped breathing as he passed. Guards straightened before he looked at them. Grace hated that part of her found safety in the silence he created, because safety given by power could vanish the moment power changed its mind. The room assigned to her stood at the end of the guest wing, facing the inner courtyard where black roses grew around a stone fountain. The bed was wide, the fire already lit, the table set with bread, fruit, stew, and a pitcher of water. A folded robe lay across a chair, softer than anything Grace had touched in years. On the mantel, someone had placed white lilies, probably because court servants thought all frightened women required flowers. Grace looked at the lilies, then at Elias. Is this where valuable property waits while men argue over ownership? One guard swallowed. Elias dismissed him with a glance, then turned back to her. This is where you wait while I read the law that is being used against you. That is a careful answer. It is an honest one. Honest answers can still leave the door locked. He crossed to the door and opened it wider. It stays open unless you close it. The guards remain outside for your protection, not your confinement. If you wish to dismiss them, you may. Grace studied him, searching for the trap beneath the courtesy. And if I walk out? Victor will try to drag you back to the auction hall under debt transfer authority. You would stop him? Yes. Because of the scar? Elias did not answer too quickly. That almost made her more afraid. Because of what was done to you before anyone knew what the scar was. Grace looked away first. It was easier to distrust a king when he sounded like one. Harder when he spoke like a man who understood that rescue could become another form of possession if he was careless. She walked to the window and looked down at the courtyard. From here, the auction hall was visible through the opposite glass. Black candles, silver chandeliers, rows of noble seats waiting for the next lot. Waiting for her. Her wrist still carried the silver tag marked 27. She lifted it. Can this come off? Elias looked at the tag as if it offended him personally. Not yet. The answer landed colder than she expected. Then the room is only prettier. Grace. Her name and his voice made the scar warm. She hated that too. Do not say my name like you have earned it. Pain flickered across his sharp, handsome face, brief and controlled. You are right. That stopped her more than denial would have. Elias stepped to the writing table, but kept distance between them. Auction law is older than my reign. It was created after the border famines, when debt houses argued that omega transfers were protection from starvation. Over time, protection became trade. Trade became spectacle. Now men like Victor call it tradition because tradition sounds cleaner than profit. Grace laughed softly without humor. So you know it is wrong. Yes. And it still exists. His golden eyes held hers. Yes. That answer cut deeper than any excuse. At least he did not dress failure as complexity. Grace touched the scar unconsciously. It pulsed beneath her fingers, warm and alive, answering not just his nearness, but something in his bloodline, something old enough to make the crown flame kneel. Elias noticed her hand and turned slightly away, giving her privacy even from his gaze. The archivist is searching for crown mate records now. Until I know what the scar is, Victor can argue that removing you from auction violates title law. Unless you claim me. The words made the fire seem louder. Elias's shoulders went still. Yes, that is what Victor wanted you to do. Yes, why not do it? He turned back slowly. His eyes were gold, but not hungry. Not careless. Because if I claim you while that tag is on your wrist, the court will say I bought a better word for ownership. Grace had no answer to that. She had imagined kings as men who took what they wanted and called the taking fate. Elias stood in front of her with every tool to do exactly that and refused, not softly, not sweetly, but like a law he had set inside himself. I do not trust you, she said, because it was the safest truth. You should not. Your crown ruined my family. I know. Her breath caught. You know? I know the Holloway estate was seized under my father's last council. I know Victor signed the enforcement review. I know the official record claims treason and debt concealment. I do not know yet whether those records are true. Grace's scar tightened. They are not. Elias looked at her. Then I will prove that. You say it as if proof listens to people like me. It has not. He moved to the table and removed the royal signet ring from his hand, setting it on the wood between them. The ruby seal caught the firelight. But it listens to this. For now. For now. The phrase stayed in the room after he stopped speaking. Grace remembered the auction hall, the crown on marble, his voice saying he would pay with crown and name. In this timeline, that moment had not happened yet, but the possibility of it hung between them like thunder far beyond the hills. A knock sounded, and a white-haired woman entered with ink on her sleeves and spectacles low on her nose. Your Majesty, she said, then looked at Grace first, which Grace noticed. Miss Holloway. I am Archivist Nora Bell. I have found 2 references to silver vow scars in pre-auction crown records. Elias straightened. Speak plainly. Nora laid several pages on the table. The mark is not a buyer warning. It is not curse residue. It appears to be a crownmate vow seal, used historically to hide a protected Luna bloodline from unlawful claim. Grace gripped the windowsill. Protected from whom? Nora's face softened. That is the part one do not have yet. Of course, Grace whispered. The truth kept arriving in pieces small enough to wound, but not enough to heal. Elias studied the documents. Why would Victor enter a sealed crown made into auction? Because if she is sold before the seal is recognized, the claim record may bury the bloodline permanently. Grace turned from the window. You mean if someone buys me, my mother's truth disappears? Nora hesitated. Legally, it becomes much harder to restore. The room tilted. Grace had thought the auction threatened her future. Now it threatened her past too. Her mother's name. Holloway estate. The reason for the scar. Everything hidden beneath 10 years of debt. Elias's voice was controlled, but the air around him sharpened. Find the original Holloway seizure order. Nora nodded. Already searching. After she left, Grace stood very still. The fire warmed the room. The food cooled on the table. The auction tag sat on her wrist like a small silver verdict. Elias remained across from her, waiting, not pressing, as if he understood that too much attention could feel like hands. I want this tag off, she said. So do I. No, not because you want it. Because I do. He bowed his head once. Then we will find the lawful way to remove it. What if there is none? His eyes moved to the crown shadow, still resting above his dark hair. Then the law will learn it priced too high. The scar flared so brightly Grace had to close her fingers around it. Elias took one step forward, then stopped himself. That restraint pulled at her worse than touch might have. Does it hurt? He asked. No, then what is it? Grace looked at him, at the king who could silence halls and yet waited outside the border of her fear. It feels like it recognizes you. Something raw crossed his face. And does that frighten you? Yes. Good. She frowned. Good. Fear means you still know the difference between a bond and a choice. Grace stared at him. She wanted to hate him cleanly. She wanted the crown to be simple, cruel, and guilty. But Elias stood there speaking the difference between magic and consent, as if he had already decided her will mattered more than his instinct. That made distrust harder to hold and attraction more dangerous to admit. The door opened again, this time without the careful courtesy of the archivist. Lady Celeste Marlowe swept inside in pale blue silk, fair face composed, golden hair shining, two guards trailing behind her as if they were escort rather than interruption. "Your Majesty," she said, "the court is asking why an entered Omega is being entertained in the royal guest wing while noble families wait in the auction hall." Grace's spine went straight. Elias did not turn immediately. "The court may ask more quietly." Celeste's gaze cut to the signet ring on the table, then to Grace's uncovered scar, then back to Elias. Her smile softened into something poisonous. "I see. It has already begun." Grace's hand dropped from the scar. "What has?" Celeste looked at her with pity polished for performance. "You think he is protecting you because he sees you. Perhaps he sees the vow seal. Perhaps he sees a rare crown mate power. Perhaps he sees a way to strengthen a shaky throne with ancient blood. Men rarely call it ownership when the prize is useful." Elias's voice darkened. "Leave." Celeste ignored him just long enough to finish the wound. "Be careful, Grace Holloway. The auction sells bodies honestly. Royal Rescue can buy the soul and call it destiny." The words struck exactly where Grace was weakest. She looked at Elias before she could stop herself. Did he want her, or what the scar meant? Did his restraint come from respect, or from a king's patience with a valuable mystery? Elias saw the question form. It hurt him. "Grace." She stepped back. "Do not." Celeste lowered her eyes. Satisfied. Elias turned toward the guards. "Escort Lady Marlowe out." "Gladly," Celeste said, already retreating with victory in the angle of her smile. "The auction resumes at dawn. Victor says the law allows no further delay." When the door closed, the room felt colder than before. Elias stood beside the table, the signet ring between them, the scar glowing faintly under Grace's skin. "She lied," he said. Grace's voice was quiet. "Not completely. That was the cruelty of it." Celeste had not invented Grace's fear. She had merely dressed it well. Elias did not defend himself. "Then ask me. Would you care if the scar were nothing?" The question came out before Grace could soften it. Elias looked at her for a long moment. "I noticed the scar because the flame answered. I stopped because you were afraid. Those are not the same thing." Grace looked down at the tag on her wrist. "And if saving me costs nothing, you can remain noble." "It may not cost nothing." His voice was so low she almost missed it. She looked up. Elias held her gaze. "Auction law has an equal title clause. If Victor forces final bidding before the inquiry closes, the only uncontested way to remove you without claim is payment equal to the highest legal authority holding the transfer." Grace felt the air leave her lungs. "What does that mean?" Elias's eyes moved briefly to the crown, then back to her. "It means if the court refuses truth, I may have to pay with the only thing the auction cannot overbid." She understood then. Crown. Name. Throne. The words from the title of her nightmare had become possible in the quiet of a guest room. Grace shook her head. "No, Grace. No. I will not be the reason you lose a kingdom. You would not be the reason. The law would. People will not say that. People have said many things about you. They were wrong." Her eyes burned. "And what happens after?" "I leave the platform free, but everyone says the scarred Omega cost the king his crown. I become dead again, only larger." Elias stepped closer by one careful pace. "Then I will say it first. I paid to end a law, not to buy a woman." Grace wanted to believe him so badly that she almost hated him for it. Outside the window, the auction bell rang once more, deeper this time, summoning the court to continue without mercy. Elias looked toward the sound, and the dangerous cold returned to his face. Grace lifted her wrist, the silver lot tag flashing in the firelight. "If I stay, it is not because you ordered it." He turned back to her. "Why then?" She swallowed past the tightness in her throat. "Because my mother hid a truth in this scar. Victor wants it buried, and I am tired of being sold before I understand what I am worth." Elias bowed his head, not as king to subject, but as man to choice. "Then we stay until dawn." Grace looked at the open door, the guarded hallway, the crown ring on the table, and the scar glowing like a quiet star against her skin. For the first time since arriving at Ravenswood Court, she did not feel rescued. She felt trapped beside the only person powerful enough to help her and human enough to frighten her. By midnight, the royal guest wing had become the quietest battlefield in Ravenswood Court. Grace sat at the writing table with the silver lot tag, still locked around her wrist, the white auction dress exchanged for a plain dark robe the servants had left outside her door without meeting her eyes. The robe was soft, but Grace kept Anna's mended gloves on because softness had never been proof of safety. Across the room, Alpha King Elias Ravenswood stood near the fireplace with 3 open law books on the mantel, his crown still on his head, his signet ring back on his finger, because the archivist needed his seal to open older records. He looked less like a king in that hour and more like a man wrestling with the bones of his own throne. Golden firelight carved shadows across his light olive skin and sharpened the hard lines of his beautiful face, but his eyes kept returning to Grace's scar with restraint so careful it almost hurt to watch. He did not stare at the scar as Victor had. He looked at it the way someone might look at a locked door behind which a person was trapped. Archivist Nora Bell arrived just after the last auction bell of the night faded. Her white hair had come loose from its pins, ink stained 2 of her fingers. And she carried a flat black case against her chest. The guards stepped aside for her before Elias spoke. "Tell me you found the seizure order," he said. "I found 3 versions of it," Nora answered. One public, one sealed, and one that someone tried very hard to make disappear. Grace stood so quickly the chair legs scraped the floor. "The Holloway estate?" Nora's eyes softened. "Yes." She placed the black case on the table and opened it. Inside lay old parchment, a silver archive ribbon, and a small piece of cracked wax bearing the Ravenswood crest beside Victor Harlan's advisor mark. Grace felt the scar at her throat tighten under the open collar of the robe. It had been glowing faintly since Elias entered the room, a soft silver line against her pale warm ivory skin. Now it warmed as if it recognized the paper before her mind could. Nora unfolded the first document. The public record states that Holloway Estate was seized for unpaid crown debt and suspected disloyalty. The sealed record adds that Margaret Holloway refused bloodline inspection under royal order. Grace's hands curled. "My mother refused because she was protecting me." Elias's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting Nora continue. "The 3rd version is different. It was drafted before the raid, not after. It lists Holloway land as strategically necessary for Crown Corridor expansion and names the Silver Scar Line as a possible protected Crown mate descent." The room went still. Grace looked at the parchment without understanding all the legal language, only the shape of betrayal. "They knew before they came." Nora nodded. "Someone suspected your family carried a line that could not be lawfully claimed, bought, or removed by ordinary debt seizure. So the record was altered. Debt made the seizure look practical. Treason made questions dangerous." Elias spoke quietly. "Who signed the draft?" Nora did not look at him when she answered. "Lord Victor Harlan, as Crown Advisor. And a secondary witness from the Marlowe house." Grace looked up. Marlowe. The name moved through the room like cold smoke. Lady Celeste Marlowe had not merely mocked the scar. Her house had helped bury it. Elias reached for the parchment. His expression darkened as he read, not with surprise now, but with the terrible confirmation of a suspicion becoming fact. "Celeste's father was witness." "Yes," Nora said. "Which means Lady Celeste may not know everything, but her house benefited from the Holloway removal. The land route allowed Marlowe Holdings to expand into Crown contracts after your father inherited." Elias closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them, the gold had sharpened. "Victor used my father's court, my house seal, and my crown law." Grace heard the danger in his voice and felt the old fear rise with it. Not fear that he would hurt her, but fear that his anger would swallow the choice she was still trying to hold. "Your anger does not make me safer if it becomes the story." He turned to her at once. The room held its breath. Then he bowed his head. "You are right." Nora looked between them and wisely continued. "There is more. The scar is likely not damage. It is a crownmate vow seal, placed by blood relative consent to prevent unlawful claim until the hidden heir reaches recognition age or until crown blood touches the vow under truth witness." Grace's mother's warning returned with aching clarity. Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready. Grace touched the silver line. So she was not warning me away from the king. She was warning me away from the wrong time. Most likely, Nora said. If royal blood had touched the seal before the record was restored, the court could argue the vow transferred into crown custody. But if the truth is witnessed first, the seal protects you from unlawful sale. Grace nearly laughed, but there was no joy in it. My mother hid me inside a law no one bothered to teach me. She hid you inside an older law, Nora said gently. One victor hoped the auction would outrun. Elias turned toward the window, where dawn was still several hours away, but the auction hall lights remained burning. He means to sell her before Nora can file the record. Yes, Nora said. Once a buyer claim enters public ledger, reversing it becomes a tribunal matter. Months, perhaps years. Grace looked at the tag around her wrist. The number 27 glinted in the lamplight. After everything revealed, after her mother's sacrifice had finally taken shape, after the scar had become not shame but witness, the law still held her by a tiny band of silver. That was the cruelty of systems built by men like Victor. Truth could arrive and still find the door locked from the inside. A knock came hard at the outer door. The guard entered with a sealed notice and a face drained of color. Your Majesty. Lord Harlan has called emergency auction session at dawn. Lot 27 is listed for final sale under expedited debt recovery. Elias crossed the room and took the notice. Grace watched his hand close around the paper. He cannot expedite while Crown inquiry is open. Nora's face had gone grim. He can if the debt house creditor petitions financial hardship and the auction master certifies buyer urgency. Grace knew before Elias read the bottom line. The border lord. The guard nodded. Lord Bramwell has renewed his private bid and requested immediate transfer. The scar cooled so suddenly Grace shivered. Celeste's words returned, smooth and poisonous. The auction sells bodies honestly. Royal Rescue can buy the soul and call it destiny. Elias looked at Grace. I will block it. How? His silence was enough. She looked at Nora. The archivist closed the case, pain in her eyes. There may not be time to enter the crown mate record before the bell. Victor controls the auction ledger. The old law gives him the floor until the first bid is struck invalid. Then I refuse to step onto the platform, Grace said. Nora's answer was soft. Refusal can be recorded as breach of debt conduct. It would allow physical transfer by proxy without public statement. Grace went very still. Again, the law had a mouth for every answer she might give. If she stood on the platform, she could be bought. If she refused, she could be transferred. If Elias claimed her, she became the king's prize. If Elias paid the title price, she became the girl who cost a crown. The room blurred at the edges, but Grace did not sit. She had been dizzy with fear before. She knew how to remain upright through it. Elias stepped toward her, then stopped, seeing the war in her face. Grace, do not tell me you can save me. His voice lowered. I was going to ask what you want me to do. That almost broke her. She wrapped both arms around herself, careful not to cover the scar, because hiding it now felt like betraying her mother twice. I want to believe you would look at me the same if the scar were only a scar. Elias held her gaze. I would. You cannot know that. No. But I can choose it now, when knowing the seal would make the lie easier. The words trembled through her defenses. Grace hated how tired she was of being alone. She hated that trust could look so much like stepping off a cliff and calling the fall a bridge. Before she could answer, the door opened again, this time without permission. Lady Celeste Marlowe entered in pale gold morning silk, fair face luminous, golden hair pinned like a crown, and Lord Victor Harlan followed at her side with the calm satisfaction of a man arriving to collect a debt. Elias's eyes turned cold. You are not invited. Victor bowed. Auction law requires the entered lot be delivered to preparation chamber before dawn bell. Grace's stomach tightened at the word lot, but she stood straighter. Celeste looked at the open documents on the table and smiled faintly. How romantic. Old papers and desperate theories. Nora stepped in front of the case. These papers implicate your house. Celeste did not look at her. My house has served the crown for generations. Holloway debt served no one. Grace's voice came clear. My mother served the truth you helped bury. Celeste's eyes flicked to the scar. Your mother hid you because she knew what you were. A complication. A girl with a mark that makes kings forget kingdoms. Elias moved then, not toward Grace, but between Victor and the table. Leave before I remove your access to court. Victor's smile did not change. With respect, Your Majesty, your authority is limited while a crown mate inquiry involves potential bond influence. Until the auction resolves, any action you take in direct favor of Miss Holloway may be challenged as compromised. Elias stared at him. You built that challenge into the law. I inherited a careful system. You inherited cowardice and charged interest on it. For the first time, Victor's eyes hardened. At dawn, the bell rings. If she is bought, she leaves. If she is claimed, she belongs to the claimant. If Your Majesty wishes to remove her without claim, equal title compensation may be entered. Those are the lawful doors. Grace looked at Elias, and her fear found a new shape. Crown. Name. The price no one could pay unless they were willing to become less powerful in order to make her free. Celeste saw the realization and stepped closer to Grace. Do you understand now? If he pays, the court will hate you for what he loses. If he claims, you will wonder forever whether he wanted you or the vow in your skin. If he does nothing, you go where the law sends you. She smiled softly. That is why women like us learn to be chosen wisely. Refusing rescue is a luxury for those not standing on a platform. Grace looked at the floor, then at the tag around her wrist, then at the scar glowing faintly beside her throat. For one dark second, despair opened beneath her. Maybe Celeste was right. Maybe dignity was only beautiful until the bell rang. Maybe choice was another luxury debt girls were allowed to admire from a distance. Then Elias spoke, not to Victor, not to Celeste, but to Grace. I will not claim you without consent. I will not let them take you without a fight. And if the only lawful price is my crown, then the shame belongs to the law that named you purchasable, not to the woman it failed to price. Grace closed her eyes. The scar warmed, not with panic now, but with something steadier, as if her mother's hidden vow had waited 10 years to hear a king say the right thing before touching it. Victor turned toward the guards. Escort the lot to auction preparation. Elias's voice cut through the room. Her name is Grace Holloway. Everyone froze. Not because the sentence changed the law. Because the Alpha King said it as if any world that forgot it would have to answer to him. Grace opened her eyes. She was still tagged. Still entered. Still one bell away from the platform. But the scar at her throat glowed brighter than before. And for the first time, Lord Victor Harlan looked at her not as damaged property, but as a threat he might not be able to sell fast enough. Grace was taken to the auction preparation chamber, while the palace was still blue with the hour before dawn. No one touched her roughly. That almost made it worse. The guards walked beside her with formal distance, the attendants opened doors with lowered eyes, and Lord Victor Harlan followed with a ledger tucked beneath one arm, turning every step into procedure. Procedure had become the court's favorite mask. It made a woman's fear look organized. It made a silver tag around her wrist look like law instead of a chain. Grace walked with her head high, but the white auction dress felt colder than before, and the scar at her throat glowed faintly under the edge of her scarf, as if the hidden vow inside her knew the last door was closing. The preparation chamber stood behind the auction hall, separated from the crowd by a carved black screen. Through it, Grace could hear the nobles arriving, chairs shifting, silk moving, low voices warming themselves with curiosity. Somewhere beyond those walls, Alpha King Elias Ravenswood was searching for a way to stop a law that had already decided how to survive him. That thought should have comforted her. Instead, it frightened her. Celeste Marlowe's words had planted themselves too deep. If he pays, the court will hate you for what he loses. If he claims, you will wonder forever whether he wanted you or the vow in your skin. If he does nothing, you go where the law sends you. Every path made Grace the cost of someone else's decision. An attendant approached with a silver comb and a ribbon. The scarf must be removed before presentation. Grace turned her gray-blue eyes toward her. No, the girl looked at Victor, helpless. Victor opened the ledger without looking up. Disclosure requires visibility. My scar has been disclosed enough for one lifetime. Public buyers must verify condition before final bid. I am not a condition. Victor finally looked at her. Miss Holloway, your insistence on language will not alter the platform. Grace stepped closer, pale, warm, ivory face calm. Despite the cold running through her chest. No, but it makes you hear yourself. His smile disappeared for the length of one breath. Then Celeste entered in pale gold silk, fair-skinned and perfect, golden hair pinned high, her expression gentle enough to fool anyone who preferred cruelty with manners. Let her keep the scarf until the bell, Celeste said. The reveal will be more persuasive. Grace looked at her. Persuasive to whom? Celeste moved around her slowly, inspecting the white dress, the silver tag, the mended gloves Anna had given her. To the court. They need to understand why no decent household should risk you. Grace felt the scar warm beneath the cloth. You are very afraid of an indecent one. Celeste's eyes sharpened. I am afraid of old magic being mistaken for virtue. No, Grace said softly. You are afraid virtue might survive without your permission. Victor closed the ledger with a quiet snap. Enough. The law is simple. And entered Omega under debt transfer leaves auction by purchase, claim, or equal title compensation. Miss Holloway has refused claim. His Majesty has not entered payment. Therefore, final sale proceeds. Grace had known the words were coming. Still, they hollowed the room. You are selling me before the crown mate record can be filed. I am completing a lawful transfer before rumor corrupts value. My mother's bloodline is not rumor. Victor's face cooled. Your mother's bloodline caused enough disorder. The chamber went still. Celeste looked sharply at him, but it was too late. Grace heard the admission under the sentence, the old contempt, the knowledge he had carried for years. You knew, she said. Victor's expression corrected itself. I knew your family had dangerous ambitions. You knew what the scar was. I knew your mother resisted crown inspection and hid behind archaic vows. That resistance destroyed your house. Grace's throat tightened, but not from shame now. From anger. No. Men like you destroyed it and called her resistance the reason. Victor stepped close enough that his voice could drop beneath the sound of the crowd. Listen carefully. Noble blood without power is a liability. Ancient vows. Without political structure are chaos. Your mother could not accept that the world had moved beyond her little line of sacred exceptions. Do not repeat her mistake. For a moment, Grace saw him not as polished advisor, not as auction master, but as the kind of man who could ruin lives without ever raising his voice because he genuinely believed order belonged to people like him. That belief was more dangerous than hatred. Hatred got tired. Systems did not. The first auction bell rang beyond the screen. Grace's body went cold. Celeste smiled. It is time. The attendants removed the scarf because Victor ordered it and the law allowed it. Grace did not fight their hands, not because she surrendered, but because the court was about to see her whether she wanted it or not, and she refused to meet that moment looking ashamed of the skin her mother had died to protect. The silver scar lay bare against her pale throat, glowing softly now, a curved line of light too beautiful for the word damaged. When they led her to the platform steps, the crowd's whispers poured over her before she appeared. Lot 27. Scarred Omega. Holloway debt. Crown inquiry. Dangerous mark. Royal interest. Every rumor wore a different coat, but all of them waited to strip her down to price. At the final step, Grace saw Elias standing near the front of the hall, not on the throne, not above her, but beside the aisle with archivist Nora Bell and Dr. Marinellery, the crown healer who had been summoned to verify old vow records. Elias's black and silver coat made him look carved from night, his light olive skin pale with sleeplessness, his golden wolf eyes locked on the silver tag at her wrist. When he saw the uncovered scar, something moved through his face that was not desire, not hunger, not possession. Grief. He looked at what the court called flaw and grieved the years she had been forced to hide it. Grace had to look away. Grief was more dangerous than admiration. It made the heart believe it had been understood. Victor took the auction floor beneath her. Lot 27, Grace Holloway, Omega classification confirmed, entered under Omega debt transfer, visible silver scar. Irregularity disclosed, prior Crown inquiry pending but not filed. Bidding resumes from private offer by Lord Bramwell of the Northern Border. The Border Lord lifted one jeweled hand from the front row. His face held bored satisfaction, as if buying her was merely a way to prove the king could be outmaneuvered. 40,000 crown dollars, he said. Gasps moved through the court. Not because they valued Grace, but because the price was high for someone they had called ruined. Victor smiled. 40,000. Generous. Elias stepped forward. The crownmate record is being filed. Victor turned with perfect regret. Not before the opening bid. Once final auction has resumed, pending filings do not interrupt active transfer. Nora Bell lifted a parchment. The seal requires only the king's countermark, which would be direct intervention in favor of a lot under suspected vow influence, Victor said. Challengeable. The nobles whispered louder. Celeste watched Grace, not Elias, and that was how Grace knew the true purpose of the morning. Victor did not need to win forever. He only needed to make every rescue look like corruption. Elias looked at Grace, and she saw the question in his eyes. Not command. Not claim. What do you want me to do? Grace's hands tightened at her sides. If she asked him to sign, they would call it influence. If she asked him to claim, she would never know if the vow had cornered him. If she asked him to pay the title price, the kingdom might blame her for his loss. Every answer asked her to carry guilt for a cage she had not built. Celeste climbed the platform steps slowly, acting as if she came to comfort. You can end this, she murmured. Let him claim you. Smile. Become sacred. The court will forgive a purchased woman if she looks grateful enough. Grace looked at her. Is that what you were planning to do? Celeste's beautiful face hardened. I was planning to become Luna with dignity. No. You were planning to become Luna without asking who is buried under the path. Celeste's eyes flashed, but she turned to the crowd before anger could spoil her performance. Your Majesty, she called, for the stability of Ravenswood, I request. Clarity. Does the king pursue this Omega because she is a wronged woman, or because the scar offers crownmate power? The question spread through the hall faster than flame. Grace felt it touch every face. That was the wound Celeste knew how to open. Not whether Grace deserved freedom. Whether freedom only mattered because she had become useful. Elias's voice was low. She deserves freedom because she is not property. Celeste smiled sadly. Then free every dead Omega today. Or admit this one is different. Silence fell. Elias went still. Victor's eyes gleamed. Grace understood the trap and felt hope sink. If Elias said she was different, he proved Celeste right. If he promised to free everyone immediately, the court would call it reckless bond madness. If he stayed silent, Grace remained on the platform. The Border Lord lifted his hand again. 50,000 crown dollars. The number cracked through the hall. Grace felt the platform beneath her feet like the edge of a cliff. Victor turned to the room. 50,000. Any higher legal bid? Elias moved. Grace's heart jumped, but he stopped at the edge of the platform. Grace, he said, and the court went silent because the king had used her name instead of her lot number. I can claim you only if you ask. I can pay only if you accept what the payment means. I will not make either choice for you. The kindness of that nearly broke her because it offered no escape from the decision. She had dreamed of someone taking the burden away. But every story in her life where men took decisions from women had ended in locks, tags, ledgers, and scars. Grace looked at the crown on Elias's head, then at the tag on her wrist, then at the nobles waiting to decide whether her freedom was politically acceptable. Her throat burned around the silver scar. If you pay, she said, voice shaking but audible, they will say I cost you everything. Elias's eyes softened. Then I will correct them every day. If you claim me, they will say I belong to you. Then I will not claim you. Victor's smile faded. Celeste's eyes narrowed. The court leaned in. Grace swallowed. And if I refuse both? Elias's face tightened. Then I will still fight the transfer in tribunal. Victor spoke smoothly. After Lord Bramwell takes possession under law. The word possession made the scar blaze so suddenly several nobles gasped. Grace closed her eyes. Her mother's voice moved through memory, gentle and urgent. Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready. Was the truth ready? Not fully. Her mother's fate remained unfinished. The records were not filed. Victor still controlled the floor. The law still spoke louder than evidence. But one truth had become clear enough to stand on. Grace was not for sale, and no rescue that made her silent could be called freedom. She opened her eyes. I will not be claimed today. The hall erupted. Celeste's smile returned, triumphant. Victor lifted the hammer. Then the bid stands. But I will accept payment, Grace said. The room fell silent again. She looked at Elias. Not as a purchase. As a public challenge to the law that priced me. If you pay, you say before every witness that the crown itself was less valuable than one woman's freedom. And after that, you help me tear down the law for every Omega still trapped behind a number. Elias stared at her, and for the first time, the dangerous cold in him broke into something like awe. Yes, he said. One word. A vow. Victor's face darkened. Equal title compensation requires formal surrender of crown authority and family name until tribunal determines restoration. Celeste went pale despite herself. She had wanted the threat, not the sacrifice. Your Majesty, she said quickly, this is unnecessary. The court will not forgive such humiliation. Elias looked at Grace. I am beginning to think this court has forgiven too many wrong things. Then he reached up and touched the crown. Before he could remove it, Victor struck the hammer once. Final chance. Any bid higher than 50,000 crown dollars before equal title is entered. Lord Bramwell smiled and raised his hand. 60. The crowd gasped. Victor's smile returned. 60,000 crown dollars. Grace felt the hall closing in again. The price climbed not because anyone wanted her, but because men wanted to prove freedom could be made unaffordable. Elias's hand remained on the crown. Celeste whispered from the platform, "Look what you are doing." The words hit Grace hard. For one terrible second, she saw herself through the court's eyes, scarred Omega, debt girl, ruin wrapped in white, standing while a king prepared to empty his name at her feet. The old shame surged up, familiar and suffocating. Maybe she should step down. Maybe she should refuse. Maybe being sold quietly would harm fewer people. Then she looked at Victor's face and understood. That was exactly what the law wanted, for the trapped woman to feel responsible for the cost of breaking the trap. Grace lifted her tagged wrist for the whole court to see. This is what I am doing, she said. Her voice trembled, but it did not disappear. I am letting the court show how expensive it made mercy. The auction hall froze. Elias removed the crown from his head. The auction hall did not breathe when Alpha King Elias Ravenswood lifted the crown from his head. For one impossible moment, every black candle stood straight, every silver chandelier seemed to dim, and every noble who had spent the morning treating Grace Holloway like a number watched the most powerful man in the Crownlands hold his title in both hands as if it were only metal. Grace stood on the platform in the plain white auction dress, pale warm ivory skin glowing under the court lights, silver scar bare along the left side of her throat, gray-blue eyes fixed on Elias, because looking anywhere else might make her knees remember fear. The silver lot tag around her wrist felt suddenly heavier, colder, crueler, as if the law itself had realized it was about to be judged. Lord Victor Harlan stood beneath the platform with the auction hammer in one hand and the ledger in the other, his polished expression tightening around the edges. Lady Celeste Marlowe had gone very still near the Luna seats, golden hair shining, fair face pale with the horror of seeing a sacrifice she had suggested become real. The border lord in the front row leaned back, his private smile fading. He had expected a contest of money. He had not expected the crown to step onto the auction floor. Elias placed the crown on the black marble with a sound so soft it should not have carried, but it did. Then he removed the royal signet ring from his finger and set it beside the crown. The ruby seal caught the candlelight like a drop of trapped sunset. Equal title compensation, he said, voice low and clear. for Grace Holloway's freedom from auction transfer. Victor recovered first because men like him survived by turning shock back into paperwork. Your Majesty, equal title compensation requires formal surrender of active crown authority and family name until tribunal review. Once entered, you cannot withdraw it because sentiment cools. Elias looked at him. Enter it. A ripple of sound moved through the hall. Grace's scar warmed, not fiercely, not painfully, but with a deep silver pulse that felt like her mother's hand pressing between past and present. Grace took one step forward on the platform. Wait. Elias turned to her immediately. Not impatient. Not confused. Waiting because she had spoken. That changed the room almost as much as the crown on the floor. You said this is payment for freedom, Grace said. Her voice shook, but she let the court hear the shake because courage was not the absence of fear. Say it so no one twists it after sunrise. Elias bowed his head once and then faced the court. I am not buying Grace Holloway. I am not claiming her. I am not taking custody of her body, her bond, her scar, her bloodline, or her future. I am paying the title price demanded by a corrupt auction law so that the law cannot sell her to anyone else. The words rang against marble, banners, and shame. Several nobles looked down. Victor's mouth thinned. Celeste stepped forward, desperate now to gather control before it slipped beyond reach. How noble it sounds, she said, voice bright enough to wound. But a king does not empty his crown for a stranger unless the mark has power over him. Grace felt the question hit the crowd and spread. Celeste was skilled at that. She could throw one polished doubt into a room and let fear build the rest. Elias turned toward her. Then let us discuss the mark. Victor snapped the ledger closed. This auction is not an archive hearing. It became one when you tried to sell a protected crownmate seal before the record could be filed. Nora Bell stepped from the front row with the black archive case in her arms, white hair loose around her shoulders, spectacles low on her nose, expression sharper than any court blade. Dr. Marin Ellery, the crown healer, stood beside her with a crystal verification lamp. Victor's face darkened. Those records are pending. No, Nora said. They are filed. Everyone turned. Elias's eyes moved to the archivist. Nora lifted the first parchment. Before the final bell, His Majesty gave me temporary emergency seal authority through the old witness clause. Lord Harlan delayed the public countermark, but he forgot the law predates the auction system. A crown-made inquiry may be filed by archivist witness when royal flame has bowed before 3 officers of court. Dr. Ellery raised the crystal lamp, which still glowed faint gold and silver. I was the 3rd officer. Victor's composure cracked. You had no right to leave the preparation floor. Dr. Ellery looked at him coldly. I had every right to follow a wound this court kept calling a defect. Grace's throat tightened. Wound. Not irregularity. Not warning label. A wound. The word did not reduce her. It honored what she had survived. Elias picked up neither crown nor ring. He stayed bareheaded before his own court and said, "Read the record." Nora opened the parchment. Grace Holloway is recorded as possible heir to the Holloway crownmate line, sealed by maternal vow magic after unlawful estate seizure. The silver scar is a protective vow seal, not curse residue, not claim contamination, not buyer risk. The hall whispered louder with each phrase. Grace heard her family name return to the room differently this time, no longer attached to debt, but to something older than Victor's ledgers. Nora continued. The original Holloway seizure draft was written before the alleged treason inquiry and lists strategic Crown corridor expansion as motive. It was signed by Lord Victor Harlan as Crown advisor and witnessed by the Marlowe House. Celeste's face lost color. Victor lifted one hand. Strategic planning documents do not prove wrongdoing. Elias turned toward the border lord. Then perhaps the buyer will explain why his private bid rose after Lady Marlowe visited his rooms last night. The border lord stiffened. Celeste whispered, "That is absurd." Captain Roan, commander of the Royal Guard, stepped forward from the side aisle holding a sealed note. A message was intercepted from Lady Marlowe to Lord Bramwell offering court favor in exchange for escalating the bid beyond His Majesty's ordinary purse. Celeste's eyes flashed. You searched my correspondence? Elias answered, your courier delivered it to my guard by mistake after you changed seals too quickly. A few nervous laughs broke out and died at once. Victor looked at Celeste with fury barely hidden. The partnership was breaking in public, and everyone could see who valued whom only while the lie held. Grace stared at Celeste. You raised my price to make freedom look irresponsible. Celeste's lips parted. For a second, she might have chosen denial. Instead, pride answered first. You were supposed to be a debt transfer. A footnote. An unfortunate girl with a scar. Then the king looked at you, and suddenly every old story threatened to matter again. Her voice sharpened. Do you know what women like me spend our lives becoming? Acceptable. Useful. Perfect. We do not arrive with scars and expect crowns to kneel. The room froze. Grace looked at her with a sadness that surprised even herself. No. You arrive without scars and help make them. Celeste flinched as if struck by truth, and no one moved to comfort her. Victor stepped forward, trying to seize the floor before her confession could settle. Even if past documents are contested, auction law still stands. The bid is active. Equal title compensation may proceed, but it does not prove freedom from claim. A paid lot transfers to the payer unless explicitly released after auction close. Elias's eyes turned gold-bright. Then write the release before I sign. The law does not require that. The woman does. Elias looked up at Grace. If you still want this payment entered, I will sign only with your release attached. Grace felt the entire court turn toward her. That was the true climax, not the crown on the floor, not the scar glowing, not Victor trapped by his own ledgers. It was the silence of hundreds waiting for the auctioned woman to answer. Her mouth was dry. Her wrist still wore the tag. Her mother's truth was not fully healed. Her family land was not restored. The king before her had power enough to lose and humility enough to ask. Grace looked at the crown, then at the signet ring, then at Elias's open hands. I accept the payment as challenge to the law, she said. I accept the release as proof I am not being transferred into softer ownership. I accept no claim today. Elias did not flinch. If anything, something in him eased, as if her refusal gave him more hope than obedience would have. Then that is the record. Victor had no choice but to write while everyone watched. His hand shook only once. Nora inspected each line. Dr. Ellery sealed the release with the crystal lamp. Elias signed last, not as king but as Elias Ravenswood, surrendering crown authority, royal title, and active use of the Ravenswood name until tribunal. When the pen left the page, the crown flame in the far bowl rose high and turned silver. The lot tag around Grace's wrist clicked open. It fell to the platform with a small sound that cut through the hall more sharply than the auction bell. Grace stared at her bare wrist. No tag. No number. No chain disguised as procedure. For one moment, she could not move. Then Anna's gloves, still on her hands, trembled as she touched the place where metal had been. The border lord lowered his eyes first. Others followed. Not kneeling yet. Not worthy of that. But unable to look at her as property anymore. Victor's voice came thin. The auction may continue with the next lot. Grace lifted her head. No, he blinked. You have been released. And now I am speaking. Elias stepped back, making space for her instead of standing in front of her. Grace walked to the edge of the platform. The scar at her throat glowed brighter, silver light spreading softly over her collarbone, not hiding the wound, but transforming how the world was allowed to see it. Every Omega entered under debt transfer today will have their records reviewed before another bell rings, she said. Murmurs rose from the side chamber where other white-dressed figures waited behind screens. Every tag placed without full consent will be removed until the law is examined. Every buyer who came here expecting silence can leave with his money and his shame. Victor barked, you have no authority. Grace looked at Elias. He had none now either, not crown authority, not active title, not the name he had placed on the floor for her freedom. That was when she understood the full cost. He had not only given up power, he had given up the ability to command the room after saving her. If anything changed now, it had to begin somewhere else. From the back of the hall, Dr. Ellery stepped forward. As Crown Healer, I suspend medical clearance for all auctioned Omegas pending consent review. Nora followed. As Royal Archivist, I suspend transfer certification pending record audit. Captain Roan placed a hand over his heart. As Guard Commander, I will not enforce transfer on any person under disputed status. One by one, the machinery of the auction stopped obeying Victor. Not because Elias commanded it. Because Grace had spoken where he could not. Everyone froze again, but this time the silence belonged to her. Celeste looked at the nobles who had once admired her and saw uncertainty where devotion used to be. Victor looked at his ledger as if the pages had betrayed him. Elias looked only at Grace. Not with possession. With awe. Victor made one final mistake. He reached for the fallen lot tag, perhaps to reclaim the symbol if nothing else. The silver scar on Grace's throat flashed, and the crown flame answered from across the hall, washing the marble in clean light. Victor snatched his hand back before touching it, not burned, not injured, but frightened by recognition he could not control. Dr. Ellery whispered, "The vow rejects unlawful custody." The words carried. The hall shifted from political shock to something older, reverence. Elias lowered himself to one knee, not before the crown, not before the law, but before the woman standing on the platform. Gasps swept the court. Grace's heart stopped. "Grace Holloway," he said, voice steady, "before every witness who heard you priced, I acknowledge you as free, protected by ancient vow, and answerable to no claim but your own consent. I gave crown and name because they were worth less than the truth this court tried to sell. If one day you choose me, I will receive that choice as a man, not as a king collecting what he paid for." Grace could not stop the tears this time. They fell quietly, and she did not wipe them away. Tears were not surrender. Not here. Not anymore. She stepped down from the platform herself. Elias remained kneeling until she stood before him. The scar glowed between them, silver and warm. Grace raised one hand, then paused. Her mother's warning filled her chest. Never let royal blood touch the scar until the truth is ready. The truth was not complete, but it had finally been spoken aloud. Victor exposed. Celeste unmasked. Holloway restored to record. The auction law broken open. Grace took Elias's hand and placed it not on the scar, but over her bare wrist where the tag had been. "Not a claim," she whispered. Elias's golden eyes lifted to hers. "Never without you." Silver light moved from her scar to his palm, forming a faint vow mark shaped like a broken tag turning into a crescent. The court sank to its knees then, one row at a time, not because a king ordered it, but because the woman they could not sell had just made freedom visible. Victor stood alone with his ledger. Celeste stood alone with her beauty. Grace stood with no crown above her, no tag on her wrist, no scarf over her scar, and no title yet except the one she had carried into the room from the beginning. Her name. For 10 days after the auction hall knelt, the crown remained on the black marble where Elias Ravenswood had placed it. No servant dared move it. No noble dared ask when he would take it back. It lay beneath the silver chandeliers like evidence, shining quietly beside the royal signet ring, reminding every house in the Crownlands that a law had once priced a woman higher than its own king. Grace Holloway did not stay on the platform. She did not move into the Luna chambers. She did not let the court turn her freedom into another spectacle with kinder music. Instead, she walked first to the waiting room behind the auction hall, where the other Omega women stood in white and gray, some crying, some silent, some staring at her bare wrist as if freedom might spread by sight alone. Grace held out her hand to Anna, whose mended gloves she still wore. "No more numbers today," she said. By sunset, every silver tag in that room had been removed pending review. By midnight, Dr. Marin Ellery had suspended all claim inspections without written and verbal consent. By dawn, Archivist Nora Bell had opened the auction ledgers and found enough altered debt records to keep 3 tribunals working through winter. Lord Victor Harlan was stripped of auction authority before the full court, his advisor's seal broken, his private record seized, and his name entered for tribunal on charges of unlawful debt manipulation, concealment of protected vow lineage, and abuse of transfer law. He accepted the sentence with the same polished face he had worn while selling lives, but Grace saw the fear underneath when the ledgers were taken from his hands. Men like Victor did not fear prison as much as they feared losing the language that made cruelty sound official. Lady Celeste Marlowe lost her Luna candidacy before noon. Her family's border contracts were frozen, her court privileges removed, and her witness rights revoked until the Marlowe role in the Holloway seizure could be fully judged. She was not dragged away, not humiliated for sport, not given a dramatic wound to make people pity her. She was required to stand in the auction hall and listen as each Omega she had mocked received her name back from the ledger. That was punishment enough for a woman who had built herself on being chosen while others were priced. When Celeste passed Grace afterward, her golden beauty looked smaller without authority around it. "You think this makes you noble?" she asked. Grace touched the silver scar at her throat, uncovered now by choice. "No, it makes me free." The Holloway estate was restored by record first, then by deed. The Crown Corridor expansion was declared unlawful, the debt balance erased, and Margaret Holloway's name was entered into the protected Crown mate line with full honor. Grace received the documents in the old chapel of the estate where her mother had sealed the scar years before. The roof had collapsed over one side, rainwater gathered in cracked stone bowls, and apple trees grew wild beyond the broken windows. Elias came with her, but he waited outside until she asked him in. He no longer wore the crown. Without it, he did not look smaller. He looked more dangerous in a quieter way, a man who had learned what power could cost when used correctly. Grace stood where her mother had stood and read the restored name aloud. Margaret Holloway. Not traitor. Not debtor. Not rumor. Mother. The scar warmed under Grace's fingers, and for the first time it did not feel like a warning. It felt like an answer. "I cannot give back what was taken," Elias said from the chapel doorway. Grace looked at him. "No," he bowed his head. "Then I will not insult you by pretending." That was why she began to trust him. Not because he had paid with crown and name. Not because the court now whispered about sacrifice instead of scandal. But because Elias stopped trying to make the wound beautiful enough to forgive. He helped rebuild what could be rebuilt. He signed, as Elias alone, every petition that freed debt Omegas from forced auction review. He sat through tribunal hearings without the royal seat, letting the council speak over him when law required it, then answering with facts instead of command. The nobles expected him to resent Grace for the humiliation of being temporarily stripped of active crown authority. Instead, he seemed almost relieved to learn which people respected the crown only when it was convenient. Grace watched him from across hearing rooms and ruined orchards, from archive tables and chapel steps, and slowly the fear Celeste had planted began to lose its teeth. Elias did not look at her as crown-mate power. He looked at her before looking at the scar. He asked before entering rooms. He listened when she said no. He remained when no was all she had to offer. On the first new moon after the tribunal cleared the Holloway line, Ravenswood Court gathered again. In the auction hall, but the platform had been removed. In its place stood a long table where every remaining Omega debt contract lay open for review. The auction bell hung silent above the arch, wrapped in black cloth. Nora Bell read the decree ending Omega debt transfer auctions across the Crownlands. Dr. Ellery stood as consent witness. Anna and the other freedwomen stood in the front row, not hidden behind screens. Then the council, under public pressure and old law confirmation, asked Elias Ravenswood to resume the crown he had surrendered. He did not move toward it. He looked first at Grace. The court followed his gaze, and this time Grace did not feel measured. She walked to the center of the hall in a deep green gown the color of Holloway orchards after rain, her pale warm ivory skin soft in candlelight, her long soft brown hair falling over one shoulder, the silver scar visible from collarbone to throat like a vow made of moonlight. Elias stood before her bareheaded, light olive skin warmed by the chandeliers, golden wolf eyes steady and humble. "I will take back the crown only if the law that priced you stays dead," he said. "And only if you stand where you choose, not where anyone places you." Grace looked at the crown on the marble, then at the scar that had carried her mother's warning into this room and survived every name the court gave it. I will not be Luna because you paid for me, she said. I will not be crown mate because old records discovered me. I will stand beside you because when you had power, you gave it up rather than use it to own me. Elias's voice softened. And if I ever forget that? Grace lifted the silent auction tag Victor had once locked around her wrist. It had been reshaped into a small crescent pendant, edges smoothed, number erased. Then I will remind you what a crown is worth when it forgets a person's name. For the first time, Elias smiled without sorrow. He knelt, not to claim her, but to let her place the crown back on his head. Grace did, and when her hand brushed his hair, the scar at her throat glowed silver. The matching vow mark on his palm answered softly. No force. No bargain. No ownership. Just recognition. Elias rose and offered his hand. Grace took it because she wanted to, because the hall had learned to wait, because every woman behind her knew the difference between being bought and being chosen. The court knelt again, but Grace looked past them to the open doors, where the first morning light touched the place the platform used to stand. She had entered Ravenswood Court as Lot 27, a scarred Omega with a price on her wrist. She left the auction hall as Grace Holloway, daughter of Margaret, heir of a restored name, beloved of a king who had become worthy only after he learned she had never been for sale.